We either adopt Bitcoin or we embrace chaos. I'm hugely bullish, right? I think, Bitcoin's going to go to a million, 10 million, 100 million, trillion. At this point, the US government is controlled by Bitcoiners. So Saylor, people said that, oh, he's going to choke and he's going to sell all the Bitcoin. When Bitcoin goes up, mechanically, we know MSTR is going to rip, right? If you're into Bitcoin and you're doxxed, don't go to France because you will get kidnapped and ransomed.
Fantastic pleasure to have Pierre Rochard, a Bitcoiner that probably needs no introduction to this audience, and someone that I'm very happy to have obliged me with this first episode. Pierre, when I was doing some research for this episode and this conversation, I Googled an article that you are very well known for. It's called Speculative Attack, published on the Satoshi Nakamoto Institute. And you published this back in July 4th of 2014. And reading it today, in February 2026, it feels more relevant than ever. And if we're honest, at least two of the three things have already played out, and we're basically just waiting for hyper Bitcoinization to happen. I want to start the conversation there. Can you take us back to, I guess, 2014 and maybe the years before that, and tell us a little bit about your story and how you got into Bitcoin and perhaps your background before that and what led you down this rabbit hole?
Yeah, absolutely. This is my favorite topic. So thanks for having me on to and asking about it. When I was in high school, so this is like 2005, 2006, I by chance found out about Austrian economics. So this is a school of thought that one of their kind of central critiques of other forms of economics is about the business cycle and monetary systems. And so I got really interested in monetary economics, money and banking, and was a sound money guy. So I was hoarding silver and, not quite in the gold league, but that was my interest from the monetary side going into Bitcoin. On the technology side, also in high school, I was a huge open source free software Linux nerd, right? So I was installing it on computers and doing shell scripting and, just having really great nerdy time as a high schooler, studying Austrian economics and playing with computers. I didn't think those two worlds would actually have any kind of overlap until I heard about Bitcoin. And I learned, I really did a deep dive into Bitcoin my last year of graduate school. I was getting my accounting degree. Again, huge nerd, right? And I was interested in accounting because of Austrian economics. Reading Ludwig von Mises explaining the value of economic calculation for business decisions, that made me want to go into accounting, despite everyone telling me not to go into accounting because of the reputation that accounting has, which I think is, not warranted. But anyway, so
What year
to
was this, by the
me,
way? Sorry, Pierre.
yeah, so this is like end of 2012, last
Okay.
year of grad school, and Bitcoin really captured my imagination. I mean, here was an accounting system that has that is a monetary system that is open source that has a better monetary policy than gold. I mean, so before Bitcoin, I had this kind of proto Bitcoin thought of, well, wouldn't it be great if you had a fixed money supply instead of, gold's like 2% increase? But it was just like, a shower thought. It was not like some kind of fully fleshed out plan that would actually be functional. So anyway, started reading a lot about Bitcoin, right? Pulling all nighters. So I was still in college, so I could still do that. And reading the forums, the Bitcoin Talk forums, reading the Reddit, and quickly realizing that some people understand what's happening here. Other people just are utterly clueless, right? So they're like,
Mm.
oh, my pet peeve was the people who are like, we need to find non-monetary uses of this technology for like domain names and medical records. And to me, it was infuriating because it was like going in the opposite direction, that we should be going in, and just completely devoid of any kind of critical thought. So um, that and also debates about Bitcoin's adoption and how that adoption would happen. So, I'm very forgiving in the sense that I had a phase where I was like, we got to go door to door to all the merchants, right? We got to go to all the stores on Main Street and explain to them that they could save 3% on credit cards by adopting Bitcoin for payments, right? And that there's like this ideology that that's how we get this done. The perhaps worst form of that would be like B Cash and Roger Ver and all that. But
Yeah.
um, I still, obviously, I'm still a believer in Bitcoin for payments. So I'm a huge proponent of the Lightning Network. I think it would be great for humanity if we all moved off of proprietary networks and went onto open source, Bitcoin backed network. But I understand and understood a decade ago when I wrote Speculative Attack that that would not be the actually primary adoption mechanism, right? What the adoption mechanism that would actually effectuate hyper Bitcoinization would really be financial, right? That the value of Bitcoin increasing is what really attracts adoption. That number go up, and I think that on one hand, this is repulsive to ideologues, right? To them, it's
Hmm.
like, no, this has to be about self sovereignty. Right? We cannot talk about the Bitcoin price. As a good Bitcoiner, you should, in fact, not look at price charts and never discuss the Bitcoin price. Right? There's kind of that view,
Yeah.
but that runs contrary to Austrian economics and because from Austrian economics, I think there's two insights. One is that within while respecting people's property rights, people's self-interest is not bad, right? There's the Wall Street movie, "Greed is Good," right? Which is kind of they're trying to make the opposite point, but um, I actually still adhere to that view that people's long-term self-interest, is actually something good when they are, respectful of others. Um, the other piece is that in Austrian economics, it's like, hey, whatever is most profitable it's actually a market signal, right? That is information to society that that thing needs to be invested in. And so the profitability of holding Bitcoin is a massive signal to everyone to adopt
Mm.
Bitcoin. And it has nothing to do with like the self-sovereignty ethos of holding your own keys. That's irrelevant because like from an economic analysis, the reason to hold your own keys is because the expected value of holding your own keys is greater than the expected value of not holding your own keys, right? So if you think you're going to lose all your money from a Mt. Gox, like you multiply the probability of that happening, and that's why you hold your own keys versus the probability of you shooting yourself in the foot and locking yourself out of your Bitcoin. Purely subjective decision making, not ideological at all, right? It's purely an
Yeah.
economic calculation. And that's kind of the lens through which I try to approach Bitcoin and analyze it. And I think that's why Speculative Attack has been timeless, is that it's based on first principles economic analysis. It's not based on like what I want Bitcoin to be, even though it turns out that's what I want Bitcoin to be.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's what all of us want us to be. I mean, I want to take you back to like one step there. You were talking about finding information back then in 2012, 2013. How difficult was that? Because I think back then, acquiring Bitcoin was not that easy other than, mining it yourself.
Yeah.
There weren't many exchanges around. You had to go actively looking in, in these forums and in these different chat groups to actually get information about Bitcoin. Can you take us back? I guess that's like 14 years ago. How difficult was it to actually grok the idea? Because I think you were probably one of the people that understood it quite quickly and didn't dismiss it at first glance, whereas a lot of people took 1, 2, 3 years to read and understand and be introduced, and then finally be like, oh shit, I actually understand what Bitcoin is and what the fundamental value proposition is, how it works, and why I need to get as much of it as possible.
Yeah, so there's actually interesting academic research on advertising that shows that even if somebody is going to end up buying a product, I think it's on average they need to see the advertisement like 6 or 7 times. before they actually
Yeah.
take action in over a period of time. So um, I was very fortunate that it clicked relatively quickly for me because I was predisposed to it, right? But at the same time, there were missed opportunities. So, for example, there was a Slashdot article in 2011 where they were talking about Silk Road, and I downloaded the Bitcoin binary onto the Node software onto my computer, opened it up, and it like didn't do anything, right? I thought it would start mining, and then I closed it and forgot about it. All right, so everybody's got their regret story. The second exposure was as I was a part of a reading group for Austrian economics at UT Austin called the Mises Circle, organized by my friend Michael Goldstein, who is now the president of the Satoshi Nakamoto Institute. Um, and he and his friend Daniel were already like, he was like on Mount Gox, like they knew their way around this ecosystem. So I had like some emojis helping me out, but
Yeah.
also you're right that like when I looked at Mount Gox, I was like, I've never sent a wire transfer before. I wouldn't even know how to send a wire transfer to Japan. It would cost like probably like $1 trillion to do it, and so and I was a broke college student, right, getting lots of
Yeah.
student loan debt, so it was but I did find Charlie Shrem's company, Bid Instant, I think it was, and so I drove to Walmart and did a money order at like one of those like money services businesses. It picked up the red phone and made a phone call, the most inconvenient process by which one can acquire Bitcoin. But eventually, Coinbase came along and then they were offering ACH, and then it became a lot, easier. That was kind of but the intellectual ecosystem also already existed. So there was a economist called Peter Serta who had written a full article, academic paper, I think it was his thesis on Austrian economics and Bitcoin, that I fully agree with. I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. Like I didn't come up with all this stuff.
Mm.
And there was an IMF affiliated lawyer who wrote a paper about why the IMF should adopt Bitcoin in order to prevent speculative attacks using Bitcoin. And I read that paper and I thought, okay, this guy's right, but also this is how Bitcoin adoption happens. And
Yeah.
he's advocating for Bitcoin adoption. And to this day, I still advocate for the IMF adopting Bitcoin, contrary to lots of Bitcoiners out there who, might find that idea repulsive. So yeah, that's kind of how, I stumbled into this. I synthesized a lot of ideas that were already out there, and kind of laid out the roadmap.
Look, it's just the reason I asked that question is we live in a very privileged time now. It's 2026. If you want to buy Bitcoin, there are hundreds of different ways to do it, and it's pretty easy to do it. Bitcoin is at the time of this recording trading around $70,000. It's been an interesting month, but not to move too quickly away from the Speculative Attack article, because I just want to say, like, as a journalist and a writer, to so succinctly sum up what Bitcoin is and how it can very quickly become the global money that we all use in so few short words is fantastic. It reads really well. And the second part is it does feel prophetic in a way, because we've seen fiat bleed happening and we've seen currency crises happening. And for me, it was very interesting in January to watch the World Economic Forum, the French central bank governor talking about Bitcoin having private issuers, and that he would rather trust a central bank to issue money than private issuers of Bitcoin. And, Brian Armstrong very luckily being on stage and kind of setting the record straight and being like, listen, that's not quite how Bitcoin works. But it's very clear to see that central bankers either still don't understand what Bitcoin is, or are either gaslighting us. But the second point to that is we are seeing numerous currency crises happening in real time now. Iran and a couple of other places have seen their local currencies completely implode. And if some of those people were lucky enough to buy Bitcoin, they will have saved themselves from that happening. Two of these things are already happening. My question to you is, despite the price of Bitcoin, which has been up and down of late, and we can get into that conversation a little bit further, how far are we away from hyper Bitcoinization? And do you think that there will be a few more currency crises that happen that lead people into Bitcoin around the world?
When I wrote it, I thought it was like, okay, so I wrote it in like 2014. In my
Yeah.
head, it was like, all right, next year probably, right? Like 2015, there won't be any fiat left, like game over because of the internet, right? All this information's out in the public. I've explained the prophecy to the public, and now it will be a self-fulfilling prophecy because you read it and you're like, all right, well, let's sell all my fiat and buy some Bitcoin. That didn't really play out the way I expected.
No.
So uh every year, like, my expectations get further and further out, where now I'm like, well, maybe by the year 3000, we could plausibly achieve hyper Bitcoinization in the next millennia. um so no, I mean, I think somewhere in between, right? So um but I think that something that is going to be surprising, and that where the prophecy will not be fulfilled, is just how much adaptation is going to happen on the part of fiat, right? Where we're going to see real large strategic Bitcoin reserves that are backing fiat currencies and stopping speculative attacks from happening. Um, Not all fiat currencies are going to do that because not all of them are managed by intelligent, people who have high agency and are, live players. But I think that one of the shocks over the past couple of years for Bitcoiners is actually how much we've already succeeded, right?
Hmm.
So, um, at this point, and like the U.S. government is controlled by Bitcoiners. So, this is jarring for a lot of Bitcoiners who have like the anarcho-capitalist libertarian bent, and who, or who thought that like Bitcoin's going to replace the dollar, and they didn't think that the dollar would adopt Bitcoin, right? So I think that's the path we're on. I think that that is actually the least disruptive path, right? The most disruptive path would have been full blown speculative attacks, right?
Yeah.
Where then anybody who was relying on any dollar denominated instrument, from Social Security to, their pension fund or their insurance, their bond portfolio, would get wiped out, right? Because now the dollar is worthless.
That's not a good
That
thing.
that Well, I mean, it would tear apart the fabric of society, right? We've seen that
Yes.
happen, right? The Weimar Republic, right? That's how you get into a really bad situation. So anybody wishing for that, I think is morally bankrupt and disgusting.
Mm.
But anybody predicting it, if we don't fix things, right, and like adopt Bitcoin, is just being realistic, right? That like
Yeah.
we either adopt Bitcoin or we embrace chaos. And
Hmm.
so there isn't like a third path, like there is no alternative. So that, I think, is kind of the timeline. On one hand, we have already achieved success. On the other hand, there's lots more work to be done, and it's on us to do it. It won't be automatic.
Pierre, do you think that the US, setting up the strategic reserve means that they are now immune from a Bitcoin speculative attack because they have plus minus $200,000 in the strategic reserve? They haven't started buying Bitcoin yet, but that's a significant amount of Bitcoin to have under the control of the United States government. So if let's just say in 5 years' time, things get really weird financially across the world. The dollar is no longer the reserve currency, and loads of people just start investing in Bitcoin. That could be the buffer that kind of saves the US from going down this road that you talk about.
So there's that, combined with balancing the budget, right? They can't run these deficits. I think they have to change to running surpluses and paying down the debt and accumulating Bitcoin. So perhaps the Trump administration will accomplish that. They've accomplished a lot over the past year already. But maybe it'll be, JD Vance or Marco Rubio who accomplishes that
Mm.
in a future administration. Um, but that's really, what ultimately, because otherwise they have to sell the Bitcoin, right? If they're running a deficit and they want to keep going, they would have to, sell off the strategic reserves. So they do have to fix the fiscal situation. On the monetary side, what they have to fix is the fractional reserve banking. So they have to reform the financial system to be 100% reserve, kind of things that are going in that direction. So stable coins, I don't like stable coins. I think they're, ridiculous, but they're going in that direction of 100% reserve banking. We just saw a new bank get launched by Palmer Luckey, is saying that, hey, this is going to be much higher reserves. He didn't say full reserve, but at least 50% reserve. So, if we're negotiating, that's a good, that's a good area to get to. Um, so I think there's a lot of really promising things going on in the U.S. What I'm concerned about is really abroad. All right. So, in terms of the number of countries that are aligned with the new reality, there's the U.S., there's El Salvador, Japan might be. Their new election here, it seems like they're going on the right path. But outside of that, like when I look at Europe and specifically my home country of France, it's a pretty catastrophic and dire situation. And
Yeah.
so France needs a Bukele to come in and really, fix things while respecting people's human rights, obviously. And that I think is the area where I'm unfortunately most pessimistic about is Europe, and its ability to kind of modernize.
Yeah, I agree. Look, I agree, and I made mention of it earlier, but just hearing the French central bank governor, literally laughing at Bitcoin on stage, but not really understanding, what's going on at a global scale is kind of concerning. And I'm from South Africa. I've lived in Europe for 3 or 4 years now, and um, I don't love a lot of the things that make Europe what it is now. And maybe it's just because South Africa is a lot more. South Africa, you have a lot more freedoms. If it's definite. I think it's a bit like America in that it pushes you to be capitalistic and look after yourself. If you put in the work, you can take care of yourself. Versus a place like Europe, which feels a lot more socialist and kind of depend on the state, will look after you, just play by the rules and everything will be fine. And I don't think that's something that ends well for everyone. But
So
yeah, I mean,
yeah, well,
go ahead.
yeah, I want to touch on that because it's a really interesting thing, which is that um, there was a Bitcoin friend of ours on Twitter who said that if you're into Bitcoin and you're doxxed, don't go to France because you
Yeah.
will get kidnapped and ransomed. And so I think that France has two things. One is that, to your point, the regulatory bureaucracy of the state combined with the complete failure of the state, right? Which is that it's what's called anarcho tyranny, where criminals have tremendous freedom, right? They can kidnap you, they can ransom you, but law-abiding entrepreneurs who are just like trying to run a business are just completely hampered. And so it's this inversion that has to be reversed, right? And I think that today I can't travel to France, right? Obviously, I'm a doxed Bitcoiner. I know that there were a lot of names that were leaked from the Ledger incident. But it's literally not safe enough for me to travel to my home country. And so at
Mm.
this point, I do feel like I'm living in exile as a refugee from France, and that until the security situation there gets fixed, I can't go back, and that's a terrible feeling.
I didn't actually know that you often went back home to France and had
Every
family
summer,
and stuff there.
yeah,
Okay, yeah. I mean, look, I would agree with you, Joe. I know you're talking about Joe Hall
yeah,
on X, Joe Nakamoto, and I went on Roxham TV with him last week, and we spoke about the situation at length in France. And not only was it the Ledger data leak that had a big influence here, there was a story in January about someone working at the French tax authority that had leaked a load of information specifically pertaining to high net worth Bitcoin holders, and after that, 10 to 15 people were, kidnapped last month in January, and so it's highly concerning. And I think, a few people in Europe are pretty concerned because you buy into the system, you give up very freely your information, you play by the rules, and that information's on sale to people that want to harm you and take things from you. So it's also very concerning. Look, I also live in the Netherlands now, and they've been floating the idea of unrealized taxes on any gains, whether it's securities or Bitcoin, and that could happen as early as 2028. And I'll be honest, if that comes to fruition, I don't think I'm going to be living in the Netherlands anymore. And it just seems very, very quickly all of our freedoms are being eroded away. And it makes me a little bit pessimistic, but I don't want to be too pessimistic in this
It's
conversation.
fixable. The
Yes.
optimism has to be rooted in the fact that it's an entirely fixable problem. It could be fixed in a matter of like 2 years. The
Mm,
whole thing could be fixed.
yeah.
It's just purely a matter of will, right? And so I'm hoping that Trump does to Europe what he just did to Venezuela, right?
Yeah.
Just start arresting people because these people are criminals, right?
Mm,
Because they could fix it and they're choosing not to fix it. And so that means that they're a part of the problem. You know, in law, if you're negligent or if you assist criminals like this person did in the tax office,
yeah.
you're liable, right? And so I think that this needs to be solved. But anyway, we're kind of going on a tangent off Bitcoin here,
No.
but I think it's very well related, right?
Look,
That
yeah.
the security situation is untenable.
It is untenable. And I think Bitcoin and policy is always intrinsically linked. So I didn't foresee us going down that avenue, but we did anyway. Let's steer the ship back to Bitcoin. The question I did want to ask you is, do you see a reality where the US and other countries go back to a gold-backed currency? Are we going to move off the fiat standard in our lifetime in the United States or in other countries?
So, arguably, the only country that really left gold was Great Britain because Gordon Brown, I believe, sold all the gold at the generational bottom in 2000. He sold the gold for $200 an ounce, I believe. And now what are we at? Like $5,000 an ounce? It keeps going up, right? So uh, the these countries still have the gold, right? The United States still has the gold, supposedly, at Fort Knox. It hasn't been audited. So I think that, what they have to do is follow through on campaign promises, right? Audit the gold, audit the Bitcoin as well. Um, and a lot of people actually still think that the dollar is backed by the gold. If you look at polling
Hmm.
data, and so there's still like a quasi gold standard that, yeah, I do think we could return to it. But I don't think that's the right path to go down. All right. Like, I think that ultimately what we would be doing, with all due respect to your home country of South Africa, would be enriching South Africa because they have all the gold mine, right? It's so whereas Bitcoin mining can be done anywhere in the world. And so there's not like any kind of geographic advantage. And so on that point alone, I think that's why we should not go back to gold because there's just no. The second thing about going back to a gold standard is with regards to industrial policy. Uh, as the gold bugs like to point out, gold has utility, right? And I agree with them. That's why the gold should be used for electronics, for teeth, right? For jewelry, for architecture. It should not be sitting at a military base in Tennessee,
Mm,
collecting dust, right? That's just like a massive waste. When we have Bitcoin, because
yeah.
Bitcoin can fulfill that store value function without hampering all of the other industrial uses, because there are no industrial uses for Bitcoin, which is a great critique of it. But I actually think that it's to its credit, right? It actually makes Bitcoin much better that it doesn't have all these industrial uses.
Yeah, look, I completely agree with you. The question is, what does it take to get people to, nation states to finally change their mind? Because again, to the third time in this podcast, going
Yeah.
back to the central bank governor of France saying like, I don't trust Bitcoin. at what stage do central banks and heads of nation states start trusting Bitcoin? Is it just that they don't understand how Bitcoin works?
Yeah, well, I think they're also entrenched, right? Like we're seeing with, the Financial Times, for example, they've been opposed to Bitcoin since it was, couple dollars, right?
Hmm.
And so they're not backing down. So I think that what will happen is that Bitcoin's value will continue to increase. So the clowning of these people will amplify, right? And that eventually there's a generational shift, right? Where you get a young person in and all of that dusty cobweb ideology from the 20th century is just nowhere to be found in the levers of power, right? It's just
Mm,
uh, that governor of the Bank of France, he will be in assisted living, right? And on his way to heaven, but he won't be running the country or the monetary system, and his ideology will go to the grave with him. It won't be perpetuated, right? So I think that's where this is going. Maybe it'll take 2 generations or 3 generations, like to get like 100% there, but that I think is um, kind of, and if we look at the history of kind of scientific advancement, um, there's this famous saying that it happens, one obituary at a time.
yeah, exactly. Pierre, you're never scared to talk about the price of Bitcoin, which I love, and you mentioned that at the beginning that it's actually intrinsically important to the future of Bitcoin. What do you think is going on right now with Bitcoin? Looking back as far as October 10th last year, when we had this huge catastrophic, meltdown in the markets, especially, load of leverage getting washed out. And now again in February with Bitcoin dropping below 70,000 for the first time, and I think in about a year and a half. Some people are concerned. I think people that understand Bitcoin and are convicted about Bitcoin see this as a great opportunity to buy Bitcoin, but that's us singing from our own hymn sheet.
Yep.
For someone who's perhaps not quite as dialed in, can you give us an explanation as to why you think this is happening, and is the 4-year cycle actually still just playing out?
So I think that obviously there's a supply and demand imbalance. If we
Yeah.
just go back to economics 101. Okay, so the supply of Bitcoin, um, in past halvings, we've always talked about the mining getting halved, right? So then the supply is getting halved. The reality is that if you look at the marketplace, the exchanges, the volumes, they far surpass the quantity of Bitcoin getting mined, right? So the Bitcoin miners are not the marginal price setters. It's really the OGs who have a cost basis of like a penny or a dollar, right? And I think that what happened was that um, the Bitcoin price went up because of demand from ETFs and the Trump election, which triggered a cascade of supply from OGs hitting that very psychological achievement number after a lot of pain, right?
Hmm.
Of $100,000. And also that now they have the regulatory certainty to actually sell their Bitcoin, right? Kind of a bit of a paradox there for all of us who wanted a Bitcoin friendly administration. Well, guess what? That means that coins come out of cold storage because now they can, with much lower legal risk and tax risk, convert into dollars and rebalance their portfolio, take some chips off the table, go pay off, their mortgage or, whatever they need to do. Okay. So there's, I think that on the supply side. And then on the demand side, there's a lack of demand. And that lack of demand is due to US monetary policy, right? So we've got interest rates that are non-zero, which, if you look at Bitcoin's history, that's not the norm.
Yeah,
So we got high interest rates, even though, I mean, come on, 4.5%, that's not a high interest rate.
it's
But
pretty good.
uh, yeah. Uh, Second, there is a massive capital investment wave happening into AI, right? We're talking on the orders of magnitude of trillions of dollars. This has not happened, arguably, in the entirety of human history. You can point to some booms like, the dot-com boom or railroads, or, electricity. I don't think those quite capture the scale
Mm,
of investment that is currently going through into AI because of the obvious utility of AI, right? I mean, anybody who's been using this technology for the past couple of years understands that hey, we should invest every marginal dollar into this because it is going to give us humanoid robots that can do any job. And so when you start thinking about it from an economic perspective, it's like, yeah, we have to invest trillions of dollars into this. We have to be the first. We have to be the best. And so that actually takes a lot of liquidity at the margin away from Bitcoin, because you can model Bitcoin as a liquidity absorber, right? When there's excess liquidity, it goes into Bitcoin because there's no other productive investment for it. Literally, that's what savings are for, right? When you don't
Hmm.
have good investment opportunities, you save money. When you have great investment opportunities, then you go invest your money. Now, going forward, what's going to happen? I think that as with any kind of capex cycle like this, there will be overinvestment. The whole thing's going to come crashing down from a financial perspective. Uh, Hundreds of billions of dollars of debt will go bad. The government will have to print lots of dollars. And so, all this to paint a picture that going forward, what's going to have the highest risk adjusted return? I think Bitcoin's going to have the highest risk adjusted return, right? So it's not like all of the factors I've described have fundamentally impaired the thesis for Bitcoin and that now, speculative attack doesn't make sense anymore. No, I think that it's just, I'm talking about a short term supply demand imbalance that is being worked through. And on the other side of that, I'm hugely bullish, right? I think,
Yeah.
Bitcoin's going to go to a million, 10 million, 100 million, trillion. So it's kind of on the short term, it is a huge opportunity. I'm not like trying to pump my backs here. I think that all these factors are verifiable, right? It's not like I'm
Mm.
I'm making something up here.
No, you're not. I do feel the same way, and I've been pretty vocal about it in the last couple of weeks. And if anyone out there has their doubt, look, yeah, I mean, it's very easy to convince yourself when you're convicted, but it isn't when you're not so convicted. I did want to chat to you a little bit about, the current state of Bitcoin, and two very big topics that came out in 2025 and into 2026. The first was obviously this core versus not debate, which we spoke about last year on Cointelegraph's Chain Reaction show. That's kind of died down a lot, and I wanted to get your thoughts on that, and if you think it's kind of fading into irrelevancy. And the second point is the quantum threat and some conversations that have been happening around that. But maybe let's just start with core versus not. What you think the TLDR is now, and then we can talk about quantum.
So I think the TLDR is that when transaction fees are low, there will be spam. When transaction fees are high, there won't be spam. So I think it's kind of, and then the debate around that will just oscillate. All right. So um, over the past couple of years, if you look at like median transaction fees, it's just like rock bottom. Like it's Bitcoin is so cheap and inexpensive to
Mm,
transact with empirically over the past couple of years. That has been taken advantage of by spammers for lots of different reasons. Um, I think it's dying down because the spammers they get bored, right? And so they kind of just move on to something else. Um, but I think the culture war was actually inflamed by a lot of kind of social things, right? Between Bitcoin core developers and the wider Bitcoin community. Why that happened, I have a lot of insight into because I have professional experience as a product manager, and the role of the product manager is to sit between the engineers and the users in order to deconflict situations like this, right? Bitcoin's open source, so there's no product managers. There is direct communication between the engineers and the users. And so all of this is perfectly foreseeable. You should expect the users and the engineers to be at war with each other in the absence of a product manager. Uh, so I'm not surprised by this at all. And I expect it to continue, and it might get
yeah.
worse. Now, what's really interesting, though, is that with AI, anybody can be a developer now. So it's going to be a completely new dynamic where I think that we might actually see an abundance of Bitcoin implementations, different
Mm,
versions of Bitcoin Core, right? So, like, not and core do not have a duopoly, right? So I think that there's going to be massive fragmentation. Everybody's going to have their pet issue. Some people are going to be upset about spam. Other people are going to be upset about censorship. Right? So all of this is good. The consensus rules actually are going to become more ossified. And so I think that that might present a risk from a quantum perspective, right? So if we can't get any agreement on what to do for quantum, does the chain split? I don't think so, because I actually think that there's kind of a collective interest in solving the quantum problem that is apolitical and not um, ideological
Hmm.
so far, right? So I think AI will fix the quantum problem. Actually, I don't think somebody's going to prompt like, "Hey, harden Bitcoin for quantum," with ChatGPT 11, and it will do that, and all of the FUD will just, in with the benefit of hindsight, all of the FUD will just be so silly. We'll be like,
Mm.
why were people were making serious speeches about quantum, and it was like so easily
Yeah.
fixed.
Yeah, the quantum argument has been really interesting. I mean, look, I guess the threat is there, and that's what I was going to ask you is if you can give us a layman's example or your general take on what the quantum threat is to Bitcoin. Is it a quantum computer just solving the private key for all of Satoshi's old wallets and bringing those coins onto the market? Do you think that's the huge risk?
That's exactly it. Because even if we do an upgrade, everybody moves their coins to an upgraded output. What do you do with all the coins that can't move? Um, and personally, my view is that they should just be up for grabs. So people will do quantum mining on old coins, and um, it is what it is. Will they sell those Bitcoin right away or not? That's up to them, right? That's the freedom of Bitcoin. It could create it could create a short-term imbalance between supply and demand. They could crash the market, but Bitcoin would
It
continue,
doesn't
right?
change
Not the
anything
first time Bitcoin's
fundamentally.
crashed, folks.
Yeah. But it's true though. I mean, like, because I've thought about this and I was like, we need those coins anyway. So maybe it's not such a bad thing that if that's that's what does it. It also look, I don't think Satoshi's ever going to come back or ever move his coins, but it also solves that problem for us as well. If a quantum computer and someone in charge of those quantum computers moves those coins, then we never know who Satoshi is. And not that I think that is an existential risk to Bitcoin, but that probably is the existential risk to Bitcoin is if we ever found out who Satoshi actually was. And quantum could fix that for us by just bringing all those coins back alive, bringing them into the market, and then, giving us hundreds hundreds of billions of Satoshis for all of us to use as money in the future. Um, the other question I was going to ask you, and I don't think I think people involved in this have already debunked all of the links to it. But obviously, there was a lot of noise around the Epstein files that came out and his involvement with the MIT Media Lab, with Joy Ito, and some sort of subversive funding of Bitcoin. Does that matter to you that happened?
I honestly, I feel like we don't know yet. Like,
Mm,
this information has been trickling out. There's like emails here and there. It would be nice to like have some more evidence of what's going on there.
yeah.
Um, it seems to me that he had his fingers on a lot of different things, and truly combination of a truly disgusting individual, but also a very functional one, right? That like he set up his own parallel world, and that um, there's there we don't even know if he's still alive or not, right? So
No.
uh, or if he committed suicide or not. Like, so the whole thing is just utterly bizarre. So I haven't really commented about it publicly because
Mm,
I don't know anything that, other people don't already know.
yeah.
Um, but ultimately it doesn't matter at all for Bitcoin, right? So if we take it at face value that, uh, for example, Epstein's investment in Coinbase and, them influencing Gavin Andresen and, trying to increase the block size limit and failing. I mean, that shows that like Bitcoin is Epstein proof, right? If that whole
Yeah.
narrative is true, which I think parts of it are true. I think other parts of it might just not be connected at all, right? Like,
Mm.
did Epstein have a strong view on increasing the block size limit? I haven't seen any
Probably
evidence
not.
that he did or not, or that he had the view that, hey, if we hard fork and we do SegWit 2x with the New York agreement, that Bitcoin will centralize, and then Epstein will be able to control Bitcoin. I don't know that he like game theory that out completely. Um, Maybe he did. You know, he was pretty intelligent despite being a horrible person.
Mm.
So maybe he had this idea that he would co-opt Bitcoin, and then he failed. It also seems like you know, he discussed investments in the XRP knockoff, Stellar, maybe
Mm.
XRP itself as well. Um, so I don't know. I think that it's kind of irrelevant for Bitcoin, but it's a bizarre story.
Yeah, it was pretty bizarre, and like I didn't jump to any conclusions. And to be honest, I went down a deep rabbit hole for like 2 or 3 days, just searching the archives, looking at keywords, looking at them, and like there is so much that you just have to conclude by yourself, and there's so much lost in translation, and there's only so many things you can read into email. So I think it's very difficult. It would be interesting to hear someone like Brock Pierce come out and actually talk openly about what Epstein was interested in doing with Bitcoin and that kind of thing. But I do think it's important that enough people out there understand that like Bitcoin didn't create, I mean, Epstein didn't create Bitcoin. His tendrils may have been, trying to figure out how to use it and move money around. I mean, that's my best guess is that he saw, permissionless money, a network to move value, and he saw that as a tool to continue doing the deranged things that he was doing. And I hope that's where it ended. But honestly, it's not something I'm losing sleep about. But it was very interesting to see some of these theories come out, and it was also very disappointing to see some of the mudslinging going on in the community around, like people pointing fingers at Adam Back and Blockstream being mentioned in the emails, and that was really disappointing. But that's just how this goes. I think that there is a fair amount of hard feelings and bruised egos in the industry that want to take their pot shots while they can. And yeah, I mean, I won't stoop and name names or anything like that, but it was just crazy. Anyway, let's leave that point. I think to wrap up the conversation, I'm very curious to hear what you think is going to happen in the next 5 years in terms of Bitcoin. I want to bring Saylor into the conversation a little bit and just get your thoughts on that. He continues to buy Bitcoin unabated. There were plenty of headlines in the last 2 weeks that kind of said, "Oh, now Bitcoin's price is getting low. We're getting to squeaky bum time. Is Saylor and Strategy going to sell some Bitcoin? Are they at risk here? What could happen?" What's your general thoughts on where they're at the moment with the price of Bitcoin, and also just your general thoughts on institutional adoption of Bitcoin versus the wider push to society using Bitcoin as money? And the reason I say that is we spoke to David Marcus recently, and I think what he's been doing with Lightspark is hugely interesting in using Bitcoin as a payments layer when you don't realize that you're using it. And I think that could be the future of Bitcoin payments, is the underlying rails, abstracting that away from people. But yeah, Saylor, Strategy, Bitcoin, and can we still use Bitcoin as money? Is that still the future of Bitcoin?
So yeah, I do think that it is the future of Bitcoin that, you know, we'll be using it to buy our coffee with our Lightning wallet. That is, I think, where we're going on the point of Sailor and strategy. I think that what he's building is really kind of the open source private sector version of what the governments should be doing, right? Which is issuing debt to buy Bitcoin. And it is, you know, it's a speculative attack, but it's kind of it's interesting because if we look at the history of Bitcoin leverage, right, because speculative attacks are all about taking on leverage to you know, to print more fiat and to acquire more Bitcoin. Um, Historically, what they have been limited by is that when you take on leverage, if the price of Bitcoin goes down, you get liquidated. And so this causes pro cyclical cascading liquidations on the downside. And Saylor is working on a solution to that. And so I think that all Bitcoiners should be applauding this. The Saylor skeptics, the digital credit skeptics, the Bitcoin treasury company skeptics. You can be skeptical of particular Bitcoin treasury companies and what they're doing, but to be skeptical of it in the abstract, I think is kind of ridiculous. So because ultimately there are two different parts of the market that have not been tapped by Bitcoin. So on the one hand, there are people who want to try to outperform Bitcoin, and historically they might go for altcoins. They'll take on leverage at BitMEX or FTX, right? So there's that, and then there's the people who like Bitcoin, but it's too volatile for them. It's been the number one critique of Bitcoin for its entire existence is it's too volatile. And so Saylor is solving for those two populations. He's not solving for the people in between who are perfectly happy with the risk return profile of spot Bitcoin in cold storage. And so those people get angry at what Saylor is doing because he's building a product that's not for them, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, I don't know, football fans being mad at baseball. It's like, what are you doing? And so that is how I view MSTR versus kind of the perpetual preferreds. And removing that liquidation risk, I think, is key for having what we could call a sustained speculative attack on the dollar, right? One that is not self-liquidating, at the wrong times. And he's proving that this works, right? So here we are, like Bitcoin's down 50% from all-time highs.
Mm.
Um, he's still buying Bitcoin. People said that, oh, he's gonna choke and he's gonna sell all the Bitcoin. That is a misreading of his capital structure. And so he's proving the model through the cycle. When Bitcoin goes up, mechanically, we know MSTR is gonna rip, right?
Yeah.
We know he's going to be able to issue lots of shares, issue lots of preferreds. Right. Like we have to ask ourselves, what has to break in order for this to not work? What has
Mm.
to break is rule of law, right? Where basically the government would seize the Bitcoin of strategy. And that's really kind of it, right? Other than like Earth getting hit by an asteroid. So, and even that, you could imagine a scenario where Saylor puts the Bitcoin of MSTR into a geographic multisig, and can kind of avoid seizure because he's got a yacht. He can go anywhere in the world, right? So all he needs is kind of like who owns the shares. He could run his own share custody platform on his yacht, buy a second yacht. It'll be the DTCC. But anyway, all that to say that, like, the Saylor skepticism always, to me, sounds like people who are envious, right? They,
Mm.
they they don't like that this person is wealthy. They don't like that he's getting wealthier just by holding Bitcoin. To them, there has to be. Well, actually, so I think that it's a Bitcoiner ideology of proof of work where they say strategy is not doing any work, right? They have to be like building houses or I don't know, running farms or putting satellites into space. If they're not doing work, then they don't deserve to have success. And that to me is literally the labor theory of value of Marxism. That's not proof of work. Okay, the proof of
Mm.
work is a concept about the asymmetry between hashing and verifying a hash. Right? It's irrelevant as a concept to corporations.
Yeah.
So uh, that that I find a really bizarre turn of events, but I get it. Right? I see where they're coming from, but it's anti-capitalist.
It is anti-capitalist, and I think it's just hard to believe for some people because there's some complex financial engineering going on there, and people just think this is too good to be true, and it's going to fail, and it's gonna blow Bitcoin up, and this is going to be the thing that broke the camel's back. But I just don't think that's going to happen. Pierre, I think I'm going to call it there. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for indulging me in this first episode of the podcast. I'm hoping to make it a weekly or bi-monthly podcast. So thank you for being episode number one. Thank you for being so giving of your time and so sharing of your fantastic insights. I look forward to the next one, and hopefully we can do it in person.
Thank you. It was an honor. And yeah, looking forward to doing it again.